everyone. Welcome back to Piping Talk Season 2. I can't believe I'm saying this, but after a few months of a break over the winter, I wanted to kind of reflect on Season 1. And this is Season 2. This is the first episode. And today we have a drummer, which is great. I've got a few drummers lined up that I'm excited to talk with. And this one is with Doug Stronach, originally from Scotland, now based in Canada. So we'll hear more about sort of his journey through pipe and drumming. He's also a really well-known teacher and has been leading drummer for a few bands in Canada. So very interested to dive more into sort of the leading a drum corps, and then teaching as well. So yeah, Doug, we just caught up for a few minutes, but how are you doing? Where are you based exactly?
Well, the last 10 years I was in Toronto, right in Toronto, but we just bought a house out in Simcoe, which is about an hour and a half southwest of Toronto. So we've
Nice.
moved in here last year and enjoying the country. It's far more country than downtown Toronto for sure. Although we're still in a town, but it's kind of a country town. So it's good.
More relaxed. You can play the drum in the garden, and no one is here to bug you,
Very
right?
relaxed, yes, very relaxed.
Nice. And so I was mentioning that you're originally from Scotland. You still have the accent, which is nice to hear.
Mhm.
Where exactly? Like, how was the journey? Coming from Scotland.
Well, I was born in Dundee, but I've spent most of my childhood in Perth, and started playing at sort of 9, 10 with a local juvenile band, a non-competing band, community band. I don't think we were very good. In fact, I know we weren't very good. We were really bad. A bunch of kids trying to play pipes and drums. My brother went along first to start playing, and then I followed along with by playing drums. So I was about 9 or 10. I thought it was more like 10, but my mother reminded me not that long ago that I was more like 9. So pretty young, pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
And my first teacher was a guy called Robert McCrory, who was a great guy, lovely man, gentle man. And he taught me what we called then the Army Manual drum scores. And the Army Manual drum scores are very similar to what's just come out for the North American mass band cadences. Much simpler scores. In fact, the ones I was taught were way simpler than what's out just now for these new North American mass band cadences. I was taught 5-stroke rolls and 9-stroke rolls instead of 7-stroke rolls and 13-stroke rolls for the 8th and quarter note rolls. So it really was old school drumming. And we didn't have practice pads. We played on tabletops, which must have been a massive noise. Bunch of kids banging away on a tabletop.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it was lots of fun. But then when we got in the drum, we had real sticks. We played Tama 2Bs. I always remember Tama 2Bs for some reason. Those were the sticks we played on the tabletop. And then when we got on the drum, we had real, pipe band model drumsticks.
Is that because you didn't want to ruin them on the table? So you're like, you want to save them for that nice drum?
I think so. I think that was the deal. And the sticks were just in this big plastic bag along with the slings. So when it was time to go play in the drum, all the kids just jammed into this massive plastic bag, which is, it's a health hazard in this day and age. But back then,
Right.
You just threw your head into a plastic bag and tried to get two sticks that matched and a sling that fit, and then go grab your drum and go and play.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Quite different to what we're experiencing, right now, right? So, and the goal is to find one that could like match with the other. It was like a trick. Yeah. Did you have a trick to like find the best like as soon as possible, or?
Well, just finding two that were the same was the big thing. We had Alec Duffert model sticks there that were made by Premier back then, and then we had Alex Connell. If you remember, Alex Connell was the leading drummer of Strathclyde Police for quite a few years. So we just had to find two sticks that were the same. And that was good enough. We weren't pitch matching or weighing them or doing anything like that. It was just get two sticks that are the same and get out and play. So it was a lot of fun. But we played those scores for almost 3 years. We played those basic Army Manual scores. And, I think it's important for young drummers especially to get a solid footing with the basics. And if you play simple scores, then you get to form your technique in a meaningful way. I think if you get into too many complicated scores too quickly, you end up playing very low to the drum, and it's all fingers and thumb trying to get through this mountain of notes, and you don't
Hmm.
really let your technique get a chance to um, solidify, become all that it's supposed to be, which is not just fingers and thumb. We're so obsessed with finger and thumb movement in this day and age that we forget there's a wrist involved and there's a forearm involved in this whole process as well. And that has to be part of the action as well as the fingers and the thumb, you know.
I can see the teacher in you, like explaining, the movement and stuff. Was it something that, do you think, you mentioned your first teacher, and I mean, I was fortunate. My first teacher was my dad, and obviously, I think he's the best.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, do you think that having your, the first teacher, and you said he was a very nice man in person. Do you think that, it made you be the teacher you are today? Like, do you think the first sort of lessons that you got, now when you're teaching, many years later, do you think it had an impact, like, the way you
Huge,
were approached? And yeah.
huge. Yeah. I mean, every student I've taught from beginner has played those or some version of those Army manual drum scores. And I make sure they play them for quite a while before they move on to something else. What I want to see in a student is I want to see their hands form round about these simple scores. And when I was playing them back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was just loud and fast. That was the sort of goal. The louder the bear, the faster the bear. So it was simple scores played loud and fast. And that really strengthens your hands. So I've done that with every single student I've taught ever since. To me, it's the first step. I have these online courses that I teach now, group courses online from October to May. And the beginner course is exactly that. It starts at nothing and takes you all the way around to the following May, where you're playing these four, and the North American mass band cadences now, but they're essentially the same thing that I learned back in
Yeah.
Scotland. So yeah,
It's
very much influenced me.
It's super interesting to hear this from you, because we've known each other for a few years, but we never really had an in-depth conversation about drumming. And
Mm-hmm.
you have a few books that are out, that about rudiments and scores,
Mm-hmm.
my dad, being a huge fan of pipe and drumming, obviously has these books, and um, I remember going through them with him, and it makes sense now, because they're very good for muscle building, and having your finger techniques, and your and it's something that you have two schools, right? One is like to make the students sort of excited about playing the drum and playing scores sort of like early on, and then you have another school that is like, which is kind of where I grew up more, which is still rudiments, and make sure that you get your muscles right and your technique right, because I mean, that's what I believe in, but it seems like this
Mm-hmm.
is what you're also into. They will go
Mm-hmm.
further, because even right now, like I always compare it to going to the gym, or after not playing for many years, you go back to the gym, and you need
Yeah,
to start get your
you
muscle
work
back
out.
in shape, and that's exactly that, right? So, is this something that is, you think it's your personality, it's the way you were taught, and so that's the way you believe it is? Or do you think that in things that you do outside of drumming, you also thinking, let's get the basic right, let's get things in shape and in order before moving to the next level?
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, obviously my teachers were huge, and I was lucky enough to have people like Paul Turner, John Eagle were influential teachers for me early on in the Vale. So those are obviously high level pipe band players. Um, but then I also studied drum set for about 3.5 years, and I've studied music composition and music theory. So all of those things that I've learned in that side of music really started to creep into the pipe band side as well. So a lot of what I have done over the last 30 years at this point is not just teach drums as a rudimental type of drumming, but to teach it as a more rhythm based type of drumming. Because in my mind, at the end of the day, when you're standing up playing, you're not thinking about rudiments. You're not going flam, 5-stroke roll, triplet, drag five, fluff, fluff, flam. You're not thinking about that. You're thinking about rhythm, flow, sound, dynamics. That's all musical qualities that you're thinking about. And when I studied drum set for about 3.5 years with a guy in Toronto called Rich Greenspoon, it just blew my mind. It was a fantastic experience. And I don't think the word rudiment was used once in 3.5 years of weekly lessons. It was all rhythm, it was all sound, it was all dynamics. And it was exploration into rhythm, sound, and dynamics. It wasn't let's learn a Buddy Rich solo or let's learn a Neil Peart solo. It was let's just explore rhythms and figure out and get really comfortable with all these things that we use in music on a daily basis. So I thought that was really interesting to me. And I thought, well, if a good pipe band drummer at the end of his days, after the 10,000 hour rule where you've practiced rudiments for 10,000 hours and all of a sudden you start to see a different picture of what you're doing. I thought, well, if that's the end goal, if that's what good drummers do and think about when they're playing, why don't we start that process of thinking about rhythm, thinking about sound, thinking about dynamics earlier on? And of course, you have to teach rudiments. We're rudimental drummers. That's what we are. But at the end of the day, it's not rudiments that come out, it's sound and rhythm that comes out. So I started to sort of combine rudimental teaching with rhythmic teaching and understand rhythms that are being created by playing the rudiments. And that's where books like Duple and Triple and Infinite Sticking come in. That's where those books come in. They're monotone lines, there's no sticking patterns. You apply the sticking patterns to the rhythm. So you're essentially thinking rhythmically and dynamically about what you're doing, and then you're applying a rudiment to that to create your finished piece. And I think that was definitely came from my drum set teaching. That's not a pipe band thing. A lot of pipe band drummers looked at a book like Infinite Sticking and said, "What the hell is this? This makes no sense. There's no sticking. I can't read it." So
Yeah.
it definitely was sort of going against the grain a little bit. But I've had a lot of luck over the years with students and using that way of teaching.
Yeah, we'll dive more into that, and also I love that we'll dive more into how you like to sort of push the needle a little bit and be more creative with
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about Toronto Police later on. But let's go back to so you grew up obviously in Scotland and you played with the kids band, and you also played in the Great One band before moving to Canada, right? What was
Mm-hmm.
the move pipe band related, or it was just personal life, or what was the transition from Scotland to Canada?
Scotland to Canada I was 18, 19 years old. And of course, at that point, you're looking at doing something for your life. And I'd went down to London to see about going to music school in London. Went down to see a guy called Michael Skinner. He was a great guy. I got to spend a weekend with Michael Skinner. And Michael Skinner had this lofty title of the principal percussionist at the Covent Garden Opera House, which I never forgot. I always thought it was a pretty cool title for a drummer to get.
I would say,
So
yeah.
he also taught at the Royal Academy of Music, which was an orchestral program. And it was my teacher in Perth, John Hall, who was outside of pipe bands. He was an orchestra drummer, a concert band drummer, and we got lessons in school with John. In fact, my book Duple and Triple is dedicated to John Hall. He was a big influence on me. He set up this meeting where I would go down and spend a weekend. And when I went down there, we had a little heart-to-heart with Michael Skinner, and I said, "Really, I'm interested in playing drum set. I'm not really interested in playing orchestra drums, although I'd played that in school, timpani, xylophone, and snare drum." So he said, "Well, there's not that many programs in the UK at that point for drum set." He says, "You really have to go to either the east or the west side of the United States, so New York or LA." And I actually tried to get into the west side first. I actually made a move we had some contacts in the Prince Charles Pipe Band. The Vale of Atholl had been to Santa Rosa a couple of times, it was Santa Rosa before Pleasanton. And we had a couple of contacts there, but there was too much red tape to get into the States. So we actually got into Canada within a month. And
Wow.
that was my sort of, push from the UK. And it was just for a year to begin with. It wasn't supposed to be a long-term thing. It was just a
It's always
visa
like
for
that.
1 year. Yeah, to teach drums for 1 year. It was actually Ken Ella that got me my first visa. And it didn't work out
Oh,
with
nice.
Ken. It was the Clan McFarlane band at that point, and they had, they had a drum corps, but they were sort of having issues with it. And I was fresh off the boat and got sort of implanted into this political nightmare that pipe bands can sometimes be. And I didn't really want to have anything to do with that. So I moved to Toronto and took up an offer with a guy called Terry Cleland, who made the Cleland drum. I don't know if you remember the Cleland drum. It was around in the 80s. Yeah, it was kind of influential too. It was well, I'm not going to say it was the first free floating pipe band snare drum, but it was a high tension pipe band snare drum, similar to what was happening in Australia with the legato drum.
Yeah.
So Terry Cleland had that thing up and running. So I was instantly interested in that. And Terry gave me a place to stay, and I could teach out of his house or I could teach out of the band hall. And that was how I got up and running. But again, like I say, I was so
Wow.
young. It was just a year, supposed to just be a year. And then it became another year. I got a visa for another year. And then I got a visa for 3 years. And then eventually I got what they call landed immigrant status after that. So,
Right. And here you
uh,
are still in Toronto
and
area, or
30 plus years
Ontario.
later, I'm still here. My mother's still
That
waiting on me coming home.
that is funny. Are you actively, it's something I always ask, like, are you actively playing? So the last time I saw you, we were just discussing this, was at Maxville. It was in 2019. And
Mhm.
I remember you were teaching the Toronto Police younger band, right? If I'm not
Junior band,
mistaken.
yeah.
The
The Ryan
junior
Russell.
band, yeah. So you're really active in the teaching community in Ontario, and even in North America, globally. I think in the US as well. So you do a lot of teaching, but are you still playing in the band actively, or mostly teaching?
No, not now. Mostly teaching and still writing and recording music. So that's my sort of outlet right now for music. But it's just so much time to play in a high level band. I'd done 2 years with SFU, and those were my last 2 years. And I would have played longer with SFU. I loved playing with SFU. It's fantastic. But I got divorced in the second year of playing with SFU, and my whole world got turned upside down. I had my
Hmm.
studio inside my house, and we were selling the house, so I was having to sort of reinvent myself and figure out what I was going to do for the next few years for work. So I had to give up SFU, and I just really haven't had time to get back playing at that level again. I'd love to get back playing at that level, but it's a commitment. It's a huge commitment in
Yeah.
time and energy.
Yeah, and once you stop, it's hard to get back into it. If
Absolutely.
you
The
need
older you
to,
get, the harder it is.
yeah, memorization and all that kind of stuff. That's always tricky. The time when I met you, and you actually, I got fortunate to play with you at the band in Brittany. It was when
Mhm.
you were playing with Toronto Police, and you've played a few years with Toronto Police. And one thing that the band was um, known for, I would say, at least, I was still back in Europe at that time, and it was like stuff that you don't hear everywhere, right? And you had a good crew of people with Nathan McLaren, also,
Mhm.
that are really into. All right, there's pipe band drumming. There's different sort of drumming styles, and how can we combine all of that stuff? Can you
Mhm.
tell me more about it? It's fun. I'm very curious about how it came about. Was it something that was always in you to experiment with drum sizes, and also just medley in general and rhythm? Obviously, you touched on it, but was it?
Mhm.
It's quite a bold risk, in competitive pipe band, to do sort of medleys, or different in some ways. Was it something that you've
Mhm.
always wanted to do, or because it was like the perfect timing with the right people in the right band?
Yeah, it was a perfect storm for sure. There was the right people at the right time. That whole thing started with Michael Gray, and Michael came up with these medleys, and he was joining the band. And I still remember the day we went down to see Michael, and it was Ian McDonald and myself and Michael in his living room in his house, and he played us these medleys. And he said, "Well, I want to do something different. If I'm joining another grade one band, I want to do something different. And here's the ideas that I have." Now, Michael is a great creative genius, but he's sometimes short on the details of, for instance, what are the drummers going to do for all this stuff? And how are we moving through all these different tunes? It wasn't your standard march, spade, reel, hornpipe, jig, which is the staple diet of most pipe band medleys. It was tunes you'd never heard before, in structures that you'd never heard before, in time signatures that you'd never heard before. And a lot of it, talking about the Breton bands, was influenced by the Breton bands. I was with the Veil back in 83, 84, we used to take trips to Saint Malo, and we spent time with the Saint Malo band and got to know Breton music very well back in those days. So I was aware of Breton music and sort of the scene and bagades and how they went about performing. So I'd always thought that's a really cool way of presenting the big sound of a pipe band. And it's funny with competition bands because we're still in the mode of sort of playing a lot of notes, and we want to play fast, and we want as many players as we can get on the field. It's all kind of extreme piping and drumming. But if you sit back and think about the sound of a pipe band, it's a massive sound. There's a lot of players. It's a big sound. It's like trying to get a 60-piece choir to play barbershop tunes or something. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a big sound. It should have big, open, slow melodies and big rhythms to really capitalize on the sound of a pipe band, which is huge. So I always kind of had that idea in the back of my mind. And of course, when Michael brought his melodies to the band, I thought, well, that's a perfect time to try and implement something different. And it wasn't just that, I was there doing the drumming. And of course, I've played traditional drumming all my life. This is something completely new for me. But I had other experience with other types of music. So I could really draw on all of that stuff to put this together. But we had Reagan Jones on bass. And Reagan Jones is, a very schooled musician. She went to music school. She teaches music in schools. Very smart lady, and she could pull off the sort of midsection, the bass and tenor portion of this event as well. So it was sort of that combination of people, and of course a whole pipe band willing to do it, because
Right.
when you present these things to a pipe band that's interested in grade 1 competition, you might have a mutiny on your hands, So the rest of the band was sort of into something different, and we went ahead and done it. And of course, it caused quite a stir. It was different, and some people loved it, and lots of people hated it.
Yeah.
But we're not amateurs. We knew exactly what we were doing.
Right. It's funny. I always say one of my favorite quote is, if you're doing something, and people are like, yeah, it was okay. Or if you're doing something and people rather love it or hate it, it's a good thing. It means you had an
It's
impact
art.
on
Yeah.
the thing, right? It worked,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's bad, it means that at least people reacted to it. Where if it was like,
Sure.
yeah, I listened to them, it was good. That's probably the
Yeah.
worst thing you can say to me when it was like, oh, how did you think of the performance? Yeah, it was good. I'd be like, oh no, I would rather hear, oh, it was terrible, it was awful, or wow, I
Yeah.
loved it. You know what I mean? So, and it was
Yeah.
definitely, it was that. I mean, I remember at the time I was playing in Scotland, and you could hear people talk about it, and
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like, well, if you talk about it, that's good PR. It means that people are
Sure.
reacting to it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it definitely shook the pipe band scene. So for those that are listening, and maybe I'll try to put a recording into this
Sure.
this episode, but how would you describe what you were trying to do? Were you still saying it was a medley, pipe band medley, or would you say we're trying to put together a piece, or what was the word to be described? Because it was tunes that, like you said, had interesting time signature. They were in like orders that were not like your typical, two-pace
Mm-hmm.
rolls. It was not even two-pace rolls.
No.
And then
No.
sort of like an hornpipe or a march, and then a jig or a thrash band, your classic thing. How inside the band and outside the band, how were you guys describing what you were doing?
I think Michael would call it a suite, which had been done before. The 78th Frasers had done a few suites, and it was a theme that was sort of varied as it went through. But when Michael presented it, it wasn't a medley, because a medley is just sort of random tunes picked and put together. This had a definite beginning, middle, and end. The way I went about it with the drumming was to orchestrate everything. So when I was writing the drumming, typically when you write a drum score in a typical medley or MSR, the snare drummers write the drum score, and then maybe the leading drummer writes the tenor and bass part after the snare part's been written, or he gives it off to the tenor, lead tenor, or whoever, and they write the tenor and bass part. But this wasn't done that way. This was done with everything in mind: the bass, the tenors, and the snare drums all in mind as one sound. So there was moments where the tenor and bass took over. There was moments where the snare stopped, which is, a musical tool that doesn't get used very often in pipe bands. Pipers or drummers, they forget to stop. I mean, it's in the rules. You don't stop, so you can't. But we stopped, and we started, and we had one drummer. We had all drummers. We had the bass and tenor playing. So it was sort of trying to make the whole thing orchestrated and together as one. And that's the way I went about thinking of it. It was kind of like a drum set performance. It was kind of like, the parts of a drum set: the bass drum, the toms, and the snare drum, and hi-hat. All of that was kind of trying to come together and create a whole sound that way. So that's the way I went about it musically.
It was super interesting. You mentioned like it was thought as a you know everything sort of together, not your typical piping does the piping and then send the music to the drummer and the drummer. Um, like was it you mentioned Michael Gray coming with music. Was the music sort of set in stone, or the drumming actually? Obviously, because you have a lot of knowledge in music theory, and you mentioned Reagan as well. Like, was it something that the whole band, or maybe not the whole band, but the leadership was participating in, drumming, participating in the piping sort of like melody line, and then the piping also participating in the sort of the drumming
Mm-hmm.
part? Was it sort of like mixed up, or you still had some sort of like, okay, drummers are okay, it's thought as a unit, but you still have more say in one or the other?
Yeah, the way it came to us was Michael brought these tunes to us, and they were very loosely formed, loose tempos that they could be played at. There's really no breaks between them. There was no sense of a break between them. And I would say what myself and Ian and Reagan done was we made it work for a pipe band. That's what we done, and that was our input to what Michael had already. So Michael's the creative guy, he comes up with all these big ideas, but big ideas need little details to actually come to fruition. So we were putting in those little details for Michael to make this thing come to fruition, and it definitely was a back and forth. It was a great example of pipers and drummers having to work together, because although a lot of people, when they heard the music, they said, "Oh, it's really simple. There's not a lot of notes. Drummers sometimes don't play anything at all. There's nothing." I heard comments from some piping judges saying there's no technique in the piping music. It's just grace notes. There's nothing there. But it was probably the hardest thing to put together in a pipe band that I've ever done, because you're talking about tunes and rhythms that nobody has really any experience with. So when you give a 2/4 march to a set of pipers, they instantly go, "I know how this goes. I
Mm-hmm.
know exactly where the tempo is going to be. I know exactly how this is supposed to go." And the drummers are the same. But when you give a tune like, ba da ba da ba da ba da 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 da, it's like, what the hell is that? What is that? Is that a march? What is it? So nobody kind of knew what these tunes were. So there was a lot of searching, especially in the first couple of years, to try and figure out how the drums and the pipes were going to come together. And it was very eye-opening on both sides of the fence there to see how pipers reacted to this. I mean, sometimes we'd just play a rhythm in the background, and the pipers would play the melody. And of course, this thing is supposed to mesh, but it didn't
Mm-hmm.
always mesh. So it was
Yeah.
very hard to sort of get everybody on the same page, thinking about things a little bit differently than what we do traditionally in pipe bands.
Yeah, you touched the point where you said obviously you had the right leadership, but also everyone involved wanted to do it, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
you knew what you were doing, right? It was not like
Hmm.
kind of a crazy thing. I mean, it was a crazy thing, but it was not like we don't know what we're doing. How was the reaction in drum corps when? And I really hope I can put the sound on it, because when you started singing, it's like there's no rules, right? So you imagine, and pipe band drumming in general, or pipe band in general, is quite very traditional, and it's rules that have been in place for many years, right? And so you come to practice. I just picture you coming to band practice with the drummers and be like, all right, this is this is what we're gonna play, and
What
you
we're
hand over
doing.
stuff that you know it might be quite challenging drumming wise, not from the technique standpoint, but from a rhythm standpoint. Like,
Yeah.
how, like you felt like you were in the band already. You were already leading drummer of the band, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they trusted you as a leading drummer in the band. But what
Mm-hmm.
was the first reaction? Do you remember when you sat down and you handed over the scores?
I think it was mostly excitement. The guys really trusted that we were on the right path. There wasn't any resistance, really, not that I can remember. If there was, it was quiet resistance. But there wasn't any resistance. There was a bit of the old shock value, just doing something different, a little cheeky, and sort of breaking down some walls. That to begin with was sort of enticing, I think, to people. In the end, that's kind of what ended it for me, was that it seemed like we were just doing more and more of the shock value thing. Like, how outrageous could we get with the medleys, as opposed to let's put on something that's really musical and really does the job. So that's
Hmm.
kind of what ended it for me. It was just too much new stuff, and I
Right.
thought we lost our direction of why we were doing it. But it reminded me, it really brought the band together. The band got really tight at that point because we had this new music that we were all behind, and we were out there playing this new music. And it actually really reminded me of my time with the Veil in the 80s. Because if you go back to the 80s, the Veil and bands like Bog Hall and Pokemet and other bands were kind of pushing the envelope with new tunes. They were playing round reels and fast jigs, kind of emulating Celtic folk band type tunes and playing. And that was kind of going against the grain a little bit with some of the older judges and some of the older bands. I mean, you can't forget that a band like Strathclyde Police in 1983, they're on their 6 in a row win. And in 1983, I think if I remember correctly, they're playing pointed reels in their medley, which is just it's not heard these days. You just don't hear pointed reels in medleys
Yeah.
anymore. They're all round. But that was kind of what was happening. And I remember being in the Vale and feeling, we had Gordon Duncan. He was our master composer, and Gordon was just a sweetheart of a guy and a great musician. Big influence on me, Gordon Duncan. And, he was our master composer, and he was pushing out these brand new tunes, and the band was playing them. And we really felt like we were, together in that cause. And that's a wee bit what Toronto Police felt like too. We were quite a
In
bit
it.
tighter as a group because of that. Yeah, it was good. It was good for the band.
Listening to you talk, it's you've always curious, like, was it just right time, right people, right place, or was it because of your personality? But you've seen the Veil with Gordon Duncan, and like you said, really pushing the envelope with music that was like out there. I mean, in the first um, sort of season of Piping Talks, I talked to Bruce Gandy, and he mentioned
Mm-hmm.
how the Frasers were really sort of
Yeah.
inspired by the Veil at that time for doing this, like innovative stuff. And then you're now in Toronto in Canada, and you were part of a band that was also sort of pushing the envelope, right, in
Mm-hmm.
different sort of um, time. And is it, do you think it's yeah, how would you describe this looking back at it? It was two very influential. One, the Veil, was like popular with all the other band, and then the other one was like popular with just shaking the whole system, right? Really. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Toronto Police was definitely out on the fringe. I mean, it was way out there. And it was just it really. If you listen to the bands in Brittany, the Breton bands, they kind of do that. It wasn't, to me, it
Yeah.
wasn't that different. It was just we were presenting that type of an arrangement and a performance inside a traditional pipe band medley contest. So to me, I'd heard that stuff. The guys had done that for years. That was their thing. Uh, like I say, I wrote music and still write music and produce music in the studio here all the time. That's not tied down with the same type of rules that piping and drumming have. So it wasn't that different for me, but definitely we'd all been in the scene for many, many years at that point, and we definitely all understood we were going against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
But in saying that, I have to say we won some drumming prizes. We won lots of drumming prizes playing that stuff. It didn't really hurt the drumming results, but it definitely hurt the piping results.
Yeah, again, it's like I love it or I hate it, and you better be on the
Yeah,
loving side if you compete. Yeah,
drummers are
that's
a
for
little
sure.
more open when it comes to that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah,
Pipers not so much.
yeah. I want to sort of change the topic a bit and go back to teaching. So you, like you said, fresh off the boat, and you started teaching quite early on. You mentioned you were quite
Hmm.
young, and you have quite a few big names of people that you've taught that are now playing in the top bands. Like, was it something that was always in you? You said that obviously you wanted to, when you went down to London, you wanted to play, but was teaching
Hmm.
something that was always in you? And is it most like what you wanted to do?
Yeah, no, not really. The only time I taught full time was the first 5 years in Canada. It's the only time I've taught full time for all my income. And really, I had to. I had a visa that said, you're a pipe band drumming instructor. You cannot do anything else. So I had to teach. That was all I could do. But my life in that first 5 years was basically studying and playing drum set all day long, and then going out and teaching in the evenings and the weekends. That was my life for 5 years. It was just engrossed in music, constantly playing, and studying as much as I could. You know, I wasn't a good studier when I was in my teenage years, but when I got into my 20s, I really felt like there was stuff I didn't know, and I really needed to study music a little deeper. So that's what I was doing. Those students at that time um, got all of that information that I was getting in drum set. They got that because I was excited about it. I wouldn't say I was a natural born teacher. I would say I have a huge curiosity for music and the mechanics of music, how music works. I would say that's who I am. So that's kind of, if you're going to be a teacher, you've got to sort of take something that you know how to do and you've got to break it down and figure out what's involved in getting someone else to do that thing. So breaking things down and getting into the mechanics of drumming, the mechanics of rhythm and music, that was what I was mostly interested in. And teaching was a way to, give that information to others. So in some ways, I've got some good students who during that time became, not during that time, but later on, they've got their own path. I mean, I know there's some big names tied to me, but it wasn't me that got them all the way to the top of the grade. They done that themselves. They just had what I would call a pretty good start, just like I got a pretty good start. And then they took it all the way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I was more interested in music and the mechanics of music. Teaching, if you've taught for any length of time, you'll know teaching is hard work. It's really hard work, and it's great when you have a great student, and it's murder when you have a bad student. Right?
yeah.
This student is crucifying your love of an instrument, and that can be pretty soul crushing. So, teaching's
Yeah.
hard work, and you should be paid for it. You should be paid top dollar for teaching.
For teaching. I know. Yeah, sometimes people forget about it, but it's very true. But yeah, like and that's the first question I have for you is like, how important was that first teacher to get you the solid base, and that then will lead to you making sure that whoever you taught or are still teaching, get that solid base. Are you still involved in the junior band of Toronto Police, or do you have other bands that you're teaching, or?
I am. I've moved out of the city, so of course it's hard for me now to get into band practices for the kids' band. So I'll be,
Hmm.
pulling back a little bit, but I'll always be involved. Toronto Police is always my band, so I'll always be involved with the kids at Toronto Police as much as I can be. And I still teach. What I really do now is my courses, my online courses, which start in October and go through to May. And we have a bunch of classes. And it started during the pandemic because, of course, we couldn't do anything in person during the pandemic. So I started
Hmm.
some of these online classes, which, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't have tried, and we wouldn't be where we are right now. But online classes really do work. So I've got a beginner, grade 5, grade 4, and grade 3 class that I teach, and it's online, and it's groups of people, so it's not one on one, and it's really kind of interesting how it's worked. Um, I'm not doing so much one on one teaching anymore.
You're doing
It's more the
groups.
group thing. Yeah, doing groups. And of course, over here in North America, pipe band, drumming, piping, it's a niche activity. And drummers are spread all over this vast area of Canada and the US. So it's hard to get a sense of a community. But the interesting thing about being online is that each week a group of drummers from all over Canada and the US meet online, and we go through whatever it is we're doing. It's a set course. Um, and it really gets the sense of community, for one thing. All these drummers spread all over, but we're meeting online. And the other thing is that the information is the same information I would give whether I was teaching one on one. And the drummers that are really keen to move ahead, I'm watching them during these courses and I'm saying, you guys are getting this. This is working. This is not a bad thing. Because a lot of people would say, well, online lessons, it's not as good as in person. And no, it's not in many ways, but it does work. And I've watched people get good over the course of these courses, and that means a lot to me. It's good.
Yeah, yeah, you must see the
Um,
reward. Yeah. So you're
yeah,
saying is it international or it's only North America? And is it a program that goes every week? And how do you sign up for people that are listening?
yeah. It's every week. You sign up, whenever you want. But it runs from October right through till May. It's a 50-minute lesson every week, group lesson, and it's basically a lecture by me. I lecture, I play, people follow along, and then people can send me videos during the week of what we're working on, so they can get personal feedback on what they're doing. And it's beginners, it's grade 5, grade 4, grade 3. I don't go any higher than grade 3 with the courses, and it's set material that they play. So that's how it works. Anybody can sign up. Of course, there's time restraints. If you're in, some other country, or even parts of the US or Canada, it's not going to work because it's,
Right.
Toronto times. So if you can make it work for Toronto times, you can come from wherever you want. But it's usually sort of Eastern US, Canada, mid Canada that kind of works out for it. But they're well
Very cool.
attended. And, for people that don't want a one on one lesson, we forget as instructors that a one on one lesson for a brand new drummer, it can be quite intimidating.
Hmm.
Or even an experienced drummer, it can be quite intimidating. So, a lot of people will sign up for these lessons and they kind of just sit in the back of the class and don't say an awful lot. And then they send you a video and you go, whoa, that's pretty good. The guy that doesn't say anything during the class, you're listening. So it's kind of neat. And I've met lots of great people and hopefully helped a few on their way to become a better drummer.
That's amazing. That's amazing to hear. And also, I do remember during the pandemic, you used to post on Facebook it was the tip of the week or something like that about how to
Mm-hmm.
or what to think about, and I thought they were brilliant. And
Good.
I'm just listening to you and how excited you are about this project that you're putting together and that you're doing. I can tell that you're having a lot of fun, which it's great
I
to
am.
hear. So
Yeah.
yeah, for everyone, make sure to put the link, I guess, on your website, your personal website, or you can shoot me a note with the website you want to
Perfect.
promote.
Yeah.
We'll put it
No,
up.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're saying this is one of your main gig, but then you also record music, right? And this will be the last topic. We'll talk about music, but you have a studio I can see in the back. It looks like you definitely know what you're doing. And yeah, can you tell us more about like what is the music studio you have?
Yeah, well, it's mostly production music now, which is music for music libraries, film, TV, any kind of media use, YouTube use. You've got music on the start of your show. Who is that, by the way? It's a good track.
It's
Whose
Jason
track is
Briscoe,
that?
actually, my good friend
Jason.
Jason, who put the
There you
music
go.
together. Yeah, yeah,
So you have permission to use that, I assume. So
yeah, I do. Got lucky. Yeah.
exactly. So everybody has to have permission to use the music. So that's what these music libraries are for. And I write and record music for different music libraries all over the world. I've got music in the US, obviously, a couple in Canada, some in the UK, and I just got placed in the library in Australia just last year. So that's opening up a brand new market for me over there. So that's a little thing I've done for the last 10 years, but I did run a commercial recording studio before that and made a lot of piping records and pipe band records, as well as a lot of singer songwriters and bands, pop bands, rock bands, stuff like that. So that was my main gig back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I've always done it. And, for a contemporary musician, um, getting into recording is just kind of a no-brainer. It's just something most musicians want to do it sometimes. It's not something pipers or drummers tend to, fall into wanting to do, although some do it. And definitely because of the pandemic, having to do these online videos and stuff, people have had to get into microphones and preamps and recording
Hmm.
software and all these other things. But other musicians are into that all of the time. So I was no different. In the 90s, I took a recording course. I studied with a guy called Brian Hewson, audio engineering. And that really, again, talk about blowing your mind. When you start to study sound and the physics of sound and how it works in a recording studio, it's a whole other perspective of how music is created. And that really, really, switched a light on for me. And I interned at the studio for a couple of years, and then I realized I couldn't make any money working for somebody else. So I had to open my own studio, which was a very sort of indie type studio. But we, made a living at it for a good 10 plus years before the whole MP3 Napster thing kind of took a hold and nobody was selling records anymore. And people, of course, stopped making CDs at that point, which is when I moved into production music. There was still opportunities in film and TV and some other types of outlets for your music. So that's how that happened, and that's kind of what I do now. But it's only in the afternoons. As of January 2020, I started running Custom Drum Sound, which is a retail sales company. And I do that with Noreen Douglas. It's kind of a 50-50 split with my partner, Noreen Douglas. And it's the continuation of Hugh Cameron's studio, which everybody
Right.
knows Hugh and his famous practice pad. Well, Hugh's,
Yep.
73 now, I think, and he's wanting to take it easy. So I had a standing gig with Hugh. One day a week, I would go in and set up all of the drums and tune the drums and do any repairs and stuff like that. So I'd done that for almost 20 years for Hugh. It was one day a week. And I never wanted the whole business because I do other things like the studio
Yeah.
and teaching. So when he came up with the idea that Noreen would be partners with me, I thought, meh, maybe that'll work. So I've been doing that since January 2020, which if you opened a business in January 2020 and the pandemic hit in March 2020, it was the absolute worst time to start a new
Yeah.
business since the Spanish flu. So it's been a rocky road for the last couple of years, but things are coming back to life now with pipe bands and sales. So it's picking up a wee bit now.
All right. Well, good to hear. Yeah, it's amazing the journey and from Scotland and going down to London and having this kind of conversation around what you really wanted to do, and then moving to Canada and taking those lessons. It feels like I was not the best at school either, but when you find what you're really passionate about, then there's no limit, right? You really want to dig
Yeah.
more and more, and it sounds like you digged into drum set and then even sound and all that kind of stuff, and it's amazing to see how you navigated all that stuff. Yeah, anything else you want to promote before we wrap up? Or I know you talked about your course, the books that you have online as well.
Yeah, no, that's sort of my life there. They're long days, 12, 13-hour days. especially taking on the new business, the custom drum sound business. So they're long days,
Hmm.
but they're enjoyable days because I'm always doing something I enjoy.
Yeah.
So they're not. I mean, you do get fed up. You get fed up with anything if you do it long enough. But in the big picture, they're fantastic days. So
Yeah. And
all good.
one thing to remember is, if you're a student of a teacher, make sure that you give 100% in
Absolutely.
commitment, and learn your tunes, and and memorize the music and listen.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It was great to catch up after all those years, and just to hear
absolutely.
your story. I mean, I knew some bits of it, but I didn't know everything, and it's always super inspiring to hear someone's story. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and
Thanks for
yeah,
having me.
all the best for what's next.
Awesome.